I'll take down your whole cell, one by one, you're done. I was ready to die. They were beating the boss, and he swore on his child and so on that I wouldn't leave this colony alive. I told him I won't hang myself. I'd sooner take you down, you bastard. It sounds funny now, but it wasn't back then. So there I was, young, sentenced to 2 years, and I ended up in the colony. Yeah, I studied and did sports. I was always into sports. I traveled for competitions, won championships more than once. Everything in my life was going great. I was an athlete through and through.
In 1999, Irina was sentenced to 16 years. This time problems began in 2007, when she was transferred first to the torture chambers of pretrial detention center number 1 in Perm, and then to one of the most notorious women's penal colonies in Mordovia, IK2.
I was young and defiant. They wanted me to collaborate, saying no wasn't an option. That was the first thing. Before that, an officer had already called me in, asking me to work for them. As they put it, we need people like you. You'll live the good life. I refused that too.
The administration quickly saw her potential. Young and athletic, she was a perfect candidate to become a collaborator, carrying out orders from the authorities and pressuring other inmates.
That was my first real run-in with the staff when they decided to re-educate me with batons. But back then, I barely felt it. They didn't beat like they do in the Mordovia colonies. In Mordovia, it's different. There, they kick you to a pulp, kick you until you're dead, basically.
Irina refused to work for the administration and even tried filing complaints with the prosecutor's office. But things only got worse. She was thrown into a pressure cell in pretrial detention center number 1 in Perm.
One of the staff was a decent guy. He told me, don't even think about sleeping. So I walk in and the whole cell is packed top to bottom with bags. Basically, they had everything. Phones, drugs, whatever you wanted. Cigarettes, everything that could be extorted. And this was the same cell where they forced people to sign things over. Say, they bring in a new inmate. She owns apartments or a factory. She has to sign over a share, gift it. And if she refuses, they'd usually beat her right there in the cell. No question about it, it was a pressure cell. Since I was told not to sleep but I wanted to, they offered me a spot on the lower bunk. I said, no way, I'm not lying down there. I figured if anything happens, at least I can throw them the hell off from the top bunk. They spoke to me gently at first, explaining that I'd be working with them. I got to know them. One was a Sambo fighter and the other, well, basically, they'd gathered women who were into sports, and ones with brains too. I told them straight up, no, get off my back. I climbed up to the top bunk where I wanted to be. There was a free spot, and wouldn't you know it, I fell asleep. Then, suddenly, I wake up feeling like I'm suffocating. At first, I thought it was a dream, but it wasn't. One was holding my legs, 2 were gripping my arms, and they had a pillow over my face. They were trying to strangle me. So what happened next? I gathered all my strength and kicked one of them, sending her flying. And then it was on. They had a pot of boiling, super strong tea ready. I jumped down and threw it right in another one's face. Then I shouted, anyone comes near me, I'll take you out, any of you. This is to the death, you hear me? We're fighting to the death, you fuckers. They weren't expecting that. I guess they were used to easier targets. But I was into sports, I was strong. I threw 4 of them off me, no problem. They started banging on the door, yelling for someone to come. I told them, nobody better come near me or I'll put them down. I said, what the hell is this? You really thought you could take me out? Then they tried talking to me calmly, saying that if I didn't change my attitude, life was going to get a lot worse for me. That was the deal. But I was already completely losing it. I told them, I'll take all of you down, one by one. You're done. I was ready to die because they were ready to kill me. But then the inmate in charge spoke up and said, she's nuts. No point messing with her. Call the guards. Let them handle her.
From the pressure cell, Irina was sent straight to solitary confinement, which was in a men's high-security block. At first, they put her in an unheated isolation cell right on the floor.
Of course, I slept there, and there were always rats. About 8 to 10 of them living with you 24/7. It drove me insane. They fed us only once a day, and even then, they deliberately dumped porridge and compote into your soup. If you didn't eat fast enough, the rats would eat everything before you could. I spent 2 months in that freezer, sleeping on a concrete floor with rats.
After 2 months, they moved her to a heated solitary cell where she was kept for another 6 months.
There was an interesting incident on my second day there. They ordered everyone to strip to the waist. 2 cells were brought out into the prison corridor. Then the senior guard says, "Wait, we've got a woman here. How's she supposed to undress?" That set off a whole commotion. "A woman? Are you out of your damn minds? You can't keep women here. This is a special unit. Who gave the order to bring her in?" Basically, the staff started arguing among themselves. Then some woman showed up and said, "She's been ordered to stay here, and that's final." So that was that. After that, they stopped making me strip to the waist, but everything else stayed the same as for the men. Daily searches, standing in the corridor every day, but whatever. That was the least of it.
The harshest conditions, daily beatings, humiliation, and relentless forced labor, Irina encountered in Mordovian Penal Colony No. 2. She was transferred there in July 2007. She was beaten during transport, and her ribs were broken. As if mocking her, the doctors advised her to be more careful.
When I jumped out of the transport, the first thing they said was, "We've been waiting for you, you bitch." Then they took me to the search room. The staff immediately started provoking me, grabbing my documents and tearing them up. I had been trying to appeal my sentence. They made it clear, "You're not appealing anything here. You've come to the wrong colony." They referred to me as that bitch and said they needed to deal with me. Then they took me to the head of the security department.
Kimyaev Vyacheslav Alexandrovich, 53 years old. In 2007, he was the head of security. Now he's been promoted to head of the entire IK2 colony.
I walk into his office and he closes the door behind me. I thought, "Are you stupid? Closing the door? Who do you think you are, Rambo?" He was a big burly guy. Then he started insulting me, saying, "What's this? You're not obeying? My officers have complained about you." I said, "That's not true." I stayed completely calm and even offered to go through a search. But from the start, he and his staff were pressuring me. He immediately made it clear that he thought I was too smart. He deliberately escalated the conflict. No matter what I said, his response was, "Bitch this, bitch that." You get the idea. He had a baton in his hand, and he didn't hit me directly on the head, but struck me near the temple. Blood started running from my ear. I looked at the blood and thought, "Are you out of your damn mind?" I said to him, "What the hell is wrong with you?" He said, "Now you're going to solitary, and after that, I'll show you what's wrong with me." At that point, I realized he was a complete psycho. That was it. I decided to defend myself. I told him that if he hit me again, he'd get it back. He clearly wasn't expecting that. Some 105 to 110-pound girl, while he was a nearly 200-pound boar, telling him she'd fight back. He took a swing at me. That was it. I flipped him. I used to do wrestling. I grabbed his arm, threw him over my hip, and he was on the floor. Then I quickly locked my leg around his neck and pinned his arm. He was still hitting me on the head with his free hand, of course. So I had him in a death grip I wouldn't let go. He started screaming, and a bunch of officers came running in. He was yelling, "Get her off me!" But they couldn't pry me off because my leg was locked around his neck. To get me to let go, they started beating me from all sides. Some with batons, some with fists, some kicking me. There were a lot of them. They just kept kicking and kicking without stopping. But I still didn't let go, no matter what. My leg went into a spasm, and I physically couldn't release him. Then the spasm passed, probably out of fear. At one point, I noticed a statuette in the room and thought I could smash this fat bastard with it. But luckily, I didn't. Then he said, "Let me go." I told him, "Make all the officers leave, and I'll let you go. And you have to promise you won't beat me." He told the officers, "Get the fuck out." That's literally how he spoke to them. Everyone left the office, and I let him go. He sat down on the couch, and I sat down next to him. Yeah, you heard that right. I sat down right next to him. I was out of breath too, and I was in a lot of pain, so I just decided to sit down. He suddenly jumped up and yelled, "You bitch, you're sitting next to me?" Now it sounds funny, but at the time it wasn't. I said, "You started this." Then he swore on his own child that I wouldn't leave this colony alive, that I would die slowly and painfully, losing my health completely. After that, they called in security and sent me to solitary confinement. That same day, I was beaten again in the punishment cell. After the beating at the head of security's office, they first put me in a cage. There's this cage near the headquarters, and everyone passing by would threaten me. One officer walked by and said, "We'll make you suffer." Then another one did the same. Then they called a doctor. She didn't even examine me, just said, "She's fine. She can be held in solitary." That was it. Then they took me to solitary. They said, "Bitch, strip. We'll show you how it's done here." I said, "Then give me something to wear," while I walked to the cell. They said, "Go as you are, naked." I said, "I'm not walking naked to the cell. Are you out of your damn minds?" Solitary is always freezing cold. I refused to go naked. They said, "Just wait, someone's coming." They called someone, I didn't know who at the time. Then this 220-pound guy showed up. They started leading me toward the cell. Then, suddenly, I felt heavy blows to the back of my head. I thought I was going to pass out. I turned around. Right by the cell they were putting me in, it was an American cell, a cage with bars instead of a door, and I kicked that guy in the stomach with all my strength. He was over 200 pounds, yet he nearly fell on his ass. The female officer started screaming, "She's attacking the warden, the warden." I was in shock. I thought, shit, I'm done for. Turns out that was the prison warden.
Portion Sergei Vasilyevich, 53 years old. In 2007, he was the head of Penal Colony Number 2. He is now the head of the Federal Penitentiary Service for the Orenburg region.
But what about the unwritten rules? Supposedly, no one has ever beaten a prison warden in any colony. But I said, that's it, let's stop. This is your own fault. I realized I couldn't fight back anymore. After all, he was the prison warden. They hit me a couple more times, and then only he kept beating me. The warden himself landed a bunch of blows, then they put handcuffs on me. Suddenly, riot police stormed in. It was surprisingly fast. Normally, it takes time. They have to get approval first. They smacked me over the head. I blacked out for a bit. I think I was completely out because my head was ringing when I came to. They were gone by the time I regained consciousness. The handcuffs were so tight my hands turned blue. And that was just my first day in Penal Colony Number 2 in Mordovia. I had no idea that this place was a site of mass torture. I couldn't even imagine it.
After severely beating Irina, they locked her in a solitary cell. She was only given medical assistance a month later.
I was kept in the American cell for a month with no medical care. My whole body was black with bruises, head trauma, body injuries. They kept shoving papers at me, telling me to sign. Sign it, sign it. I refused. The bastards, I wouldn't sign a single thing. Eventually, they sent me to the hospital in Block 12. That's the psych ward. But when the doctor saw me, she said, "What did you bring me? She's dying. She's completely beaten up." I spent 2 months in the hospital. Then they sent me back and straight to solitary again. So I arrived at Penal Colony Number 2, and they threw me right back into solitary.
That night, the deputy warden for logistics, Sergei Rezhov, came to Irina's cell. He suggested that she hang herself. Sergei Vladimirovich Rezhov, who was then the deputy warden of Penal Colony Number 2, had served as its warden from 2014 to 2016.
Rizov came in, threw a rope into the cell, and told me to hang myself that night. Basically, he wanted me to give up any hope that things would turn out all right. He threw the rope in so I could use it to hang myself. I told him, "I'm not hanging myself. I'd rather take you down, you bastard." That's how the conversation went. He said, "I'll be back. I'll come tonight with the guards." I told him, "Come on, I've been waiting for you." I already knew they were going to beat me. Kimyev and the others had promised I would die a slow and painful death, so I had no illusions. And he kept his word. They came. A whole crowd of them stormed into the cell, and the fun started. What's funny is that the doctors later told me, "At least stop fighting back. If you resist, then they'll only beat you harder, out of anger." So I decided, just once, not to fight back. I regretted it. They aimed straight for my kidneys, my head, countless blows, kicks, punches, batons. There were so many of them that they could barely fit in the small cell. I begged them to stop, but no one listened. I remember telling them that I don't forget things either, but the only thing they kept repeating was, "You're gonna die in this cell, you bitch." When they were done beating me, they left me there, and that was right after I got back from the hospital.
Olga spent 5 years in this colony. The first time she was beaten was for talking too much. In the colony, inmates were expected to remain silent at all times.
I saw it with my own eyes. Porshin, Kimyaev, and Rizhov lined up a squad and started beating them. They tried to run, but were chased down. Security officers dragged them back as they lost consciousness. There were pools of blood. I was terrified. I didn't work. I didn't go anywhere. I always stayed at my squad's barracks. Once Porshin gave me a beating, he hit me twice on the head.
Beatings weren't the only form of torture in the colony. There was a long list of other methods.
They would dig a pit, about 6 feet deep or more. They would force inmates to dig it. A pit just like a grave. You get it, right? A pit 6 feet deep. Then, no matter the weather, rain or no rain, they'd throw inmates in there. The guards would stand around smoking, tossing their cigarette butts in. There were many HIV-positive inmates working 3-4 shifts in a row. Their immune systems crashed, down to just 20 T cells, and that was it. They ended up in the cemetery because sometimes there were no meds, and sometimes they weren't even allowed into the infirmary. That's why the death rate was so high.
Former inmates of Penal Colony Number 2 and human rights activists have repeatedly spoken publicly about torture and forced labor in the sewing workshop. Women work 2 shifts in a row from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., often without being allowed to use the bathroom, let alone having days off. They sew insulated blizzard uniforms and workwear for Russian Railways employees.
Young, beautiful girls would arrive, full of life and energy. They would be completely destroyed in a week. In just a week, it was impossible to recognize them. They weren't allowed to bathe. They were just transformed. That's the kind of moral pressure, so to speak. I got scared when a girl was brought in. She was sentenced to 9 years. They beat her badly, didn't let her into the cafeteria, didn't give her food. She simply sat on a bench, took off her scarf, and strangled herself with it. I was really scared. They say her last words were, "I can't endure 9 years of these beatings. I just can't." Then there was a woman who hung herself in the hard punishment block.
I remember when I arrived, it happened that I was also in the headquarters. A girl ran out covered in blood, shouting, "They're killing me." She had run straight from the security department office. Later, they said she ran straight to the forbidden zone. She died in the end because they hit her on the head. She had a plate in her skull. She died later. These are cases I personally witnessed when the girl came out, not just came out, but flew out from the security department without teeth, all covered in blood. Her teeth were all over the floor. I worked in the infirmary repairing things, and as I walked, I saw a body lying next to the infirmary. The sheet was blown off, and it was clear that the body was covered in bruises. I said to myself, it started again. Who did the cops kill this time? That's Irina. She is said to have hanged herself.
At IK2, accidents were a regular occurrence, with women either dying under mysterious circumstances or allegedly committing suicide. In October 2011, after enduring repeated beatings, Tatyana Cheparina hanged herself at her workplace. She was denied food, not allowed to use the toilet, and forced to work without breaks. Her body was initially carried outside and left near the medical unit, where it remained for several days. In April 2013, the colony's authorities carried out an extrajudicial execution of 2 prisoners who had attempted to escape but were caught and beaten to death. In the fall of 2013, prisoner Babchenko succumbed to the injuries from her beatings. In December 2013, prisoner Natalia Ulyanova died at her workplace after being forced to work 2 consecutive shifts without medical assistance. While still alive, she was thrown to die near the watchtower.
For example, while men were not stripped down and were beaten with batons, there was one drawback in IK2. Several women were brought to the headquarters, stripped completely naked from the waist down, made to stand on their toes, and beaten with batons. Their backsides, along with other areas, would turn black from the beatings. In addition to being stripped, they were also humiliated. It didn't matter who was sent to the punishment cell. They would inevitably be beaten. Not a day went by without someone being assaulted. One of their twisted games involved setting a horizontal bar 1/2 meter above the ground and forcing people to crawl under it. When the door to the cell opened, they would make you crawl under the bar. If you brushed it with your back, you were beaten with a baton. And naturally, people would hit the bar with their backs because crawling under it was nearly impossible. They would then beat you immediately. Another daily ritual involved running. Every evening you had to run. Batons would be used to beat you on both sides while you ran. This applied to everyone in the punishment cell.
Torture by sleep deprivation was another horrific method. I always said that sleep deprivation torture was the worst. They wouldn't let you sleep for 2 or 3 days at a time.
Cold torture was also commonplace in the punishment cells. All the doors would be opened, every single one. This mostly applied to me as I spent a year in the shizo. Special methods of education were used on me, mainly to make me die faster. In the evenings, there were swarms of mosquitoes. The mosquitoes would eat you alive. God forbid you tried to kill one of them. They'd watch you through the window, and if you tried to swat one, they'd come out and beat you with a baton. That was the kind of punishment you received.
While in the colony, Irina constantly sent complaints to various authorities, demanding that criminal cases be opened against the staff. From time to time, prosecutors and inspectors would come to investigate these complaints.
I told them how they abused prisoners, how they beat me, and he wrote everything down. Prosecutor Dubrovny recorded it all on paper. He had to come because my complaints had worked again. I managed to send my complaints through the medical unit, writing about how they tormented people in that colony. While I was giving my testimony, this fat guy kept kicking me under the table while trying to stop me from speaking. But I told everything as it was. I told them that they had killed Irina. I also described how they tormented prisoners in the winter, forcing girls to clean the parade ground with toothbrushes and rags so that it would look like summer with no snow. There's a church there, built in 2007. There's a real photo showing women carrying logs. Some broke their arms, others their legs because the logs were so heavy. If a log fell on you, it wouldn't end well.
Then, the supervisory prosecutor for Mordovia came. I don't remember his last name now. His son worked there and personally took part in the beatings and torture of prisoners. The prosecutor called me in for a private meeting and said, "We've received a complaint from you. Why are you accusing the administration?" I said, "All right, let's assume you think I'm lying, making things up about the administration. Why don't you ask your own son how yesterday, near the duty officer's post, he was beating women old enough to be his mother?" The prosecutor just looked at me. After that day, I never saw his son in the colony again. He stopped working there.
All complaints were met with formal replies that led nowhere. But at least while inspectors were present, the torture in the colony would stop.
At one point, Babushkin, a man from the presidential administration, came for an inspection and he saw the log books. All that was written there was, fell down the stairs, broke an arm, fell down the stairs, broke a collarbone, fell down the stairs. Every injury and trauma was officially explained as an accident. Right. So everyone just kept falling and breaking their own bones. Of course, he made a note of it and took his report to Moscow. He recorded what he could, everything else they hid. They always hide things. For example, I had 2 medical records. One was with the doctor, and the other was for official reporting.
In general, getting any kind of medical assistance in the colony was nearly impossible.
There was one case where I had to pull out a girl's tooth with pliers because they refused to send her to the dentist. She told me, "Irina, I can't take it anymore. My abscess is killing me. Pull the tooth out." I said, "Are you crazy? I'm not a monster." But in the end, I pulled her tooth because they wouldn't let her into the medical unit, no matter what. She had already been beaten. She was told she was supposed to work, not go to a dentist. The medical care there was abysmal. Even if you had your own medication, getting access to it was another battle.
There were no exceptions, even if a woman was injured while working in the sewing workshop.
If the girls exhausted from lack of sleep, they weren't allowed to rest, dozed off at their machines and cut off their fingers, they were simply told to wrap the wound up and keep sewing. It's no big deal.
The colony's administration only hired staff who would fit in with the team, people who would willingly take part in beatings and torture.
If the inmates didn't meet their quotas, the staff would be punished as well. If the prisoners in solitary confinement didn't run fast enough during forced exercises, if they weren't beaten enough, then the staff had to run instead. That was just how the system worked. If you couldn't bring yourself to beat the inmates, you had to quit. They made sure to pick people who were all on the same page, a united team. In other words, if you worked there, you had to be ready to beat people. That's why there were daily beatings. Prisoners were constantly taken to the main office to be beaten. In 8 years, I don't remember a single day when no one was assaulted.
Former inmates are reluctant to talk about sexual violence. According to them, the deputy warden, Rizov, abused his position more often than anyone else.
Violence in the colony took different forms. Some was coercive, some was not. There were also those who went along with it willingly in exchange for privileges. This was in the women's colony. People didn't talk about it much, but many women were ashamed and kept silent. Still, the girls from the MDF production unit always shared what he did.
Irina was released in the fall of 2014.
I was set free, but they didn't want to let me go. Right before my release, I was attacked. The prison enforcers jumped me. One of them even managed to cut me a little. I came to and I was bleeding. She had a shiv, but I managed to push her off. Other inmates were nearby watching. There were security cameras everywhere, so everything was caught on tape. I don't know if they wanted to kill me or just maim me, but in the end, it didn't work out. The guards rushed in and took both of us to the main office. When we got there, she turned to Kimyaev, the head of security, and said, Papa, I didn't manage to do it." Word was that the warden hit him for that. Apparently, he had tried to take me out behind the warden's back. On my bed, just like on Navalny's, there were tags listing me as prone to this and that, every possible label, and every 2 hours, they'd shine a flashlight in my face to make sure I was there. They kept checking on me.
None of the officials at Penal Colony Number 2 faced any consequences. On the contrary, they were all promoted. Kimyaev and Porshin still work in the Federal Penitentiary Service, and complaints from Penal Colony Number 2 keep coming in. The Insider's journalists continue their work despite pressure from Russian authorities. You can support them by liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to our channel. If you'd like to further support their efforts, consider making a donation by clicking the link in the description below.